You and I are the result, the sum total of all the things that we practice. So ask yourself, what are you practicing? What have you been practicing in your life? A wise man once told me that you are what you repeatedly practice. What you see before you right now, looking at this screen, if you're watching this podcast on the YouTube channel, this body, this version of Jetty that you see before you is a sum total of all the things I've been practicing in my life. Not just my movements, not just my martial arts, not just my stretches. The way that I think is a practice. The way that I communicate and speak is a practice. The way that I wake up and organize and structure my day. Everything that I do is a practice. Every action that I take, I'm practicing something. Not all practices are great. I used to have a tobacco practice where I would smoke tobacco many times throughout the day. And that was a practice to me because it was something I did over and over again repeatedly. And it reinforced a habit, made it really easy for me to go to that. In the same way that if I practice swinging a baseball bat 100,000 times, I'm going to get better at swinging that baseball bat. So there's this difference between academic knowledge and embodied knowledge that's really important to share. Even listening to this podcast, I joke around sometimes. I yell at you guys for only listening to the podcast. It's wonderful. I love that you guys tune in and you listen to what I have to say, and maybe you like what you hear, maybe you don't. But just listening to something and acquiring knowledge doesn't fully prepare you to implement that knowledge. It's just a concept. It's just a theory. If I've never thrown a baseball before, but I've listened to somebody describe how to hold the seams and how to step and how to turn my hips and accelerate my arm to throw a perfect strike, do you think that just listening to that over and over again is gonna help me to throw a perfect strike the first time that I pick up a baseball? Absolutely not. And I could listen to that for years and years and years. And it might it's definitely going to prepare me more than if I just picked up a ball and threw it without any kind of preparation. But that actual practice, taking my body and putting it through the motions of doing something, like throwing a baseball, is the only way for me to get that embodied knowledge. So many of us are walking around in the world with this massive supercomputer that's attached to our neck that sits right above our shoulders, that we rely on to function in our day. We forget that there's a body here that is capable of learning. We've deprioritized the physical knowledge that we have access to, because frankly, we don't need our bodies as much anymore. I don't need my physical strength to feed myself. I don't need my physical strength to get water. I don't need my physical strength to even acquire a partner. It certainly helps if I've got some good looks and physique and I look healthy, right? I mean, that's still a part of the equation. But overall, our physical knowledge is not something we rely on for survival. So of course, embodied knowledge, way down the ladder. It's gotten deprioritized. We don't care about it anymore. But we don't also acknowledge how important it actually is. When was the last time that you stood in front of a large group of people and you had to share some of the most honest truth from your heart? If you're not used to doing this, if you're not practiced in doing this, then I'm sure that your palms were sweaty, your heart rate was elevated. Maybe your body was shaking a little bit. You were in your head trying to think about what you were going to say, trying to memorize the speech that you had. But what if you'd done that 10 times? On that 10th time, would it be easier than the first? Or 100 times? Or 1,000 times? Or that 10,000th time that you stood in front of people you don't know and shared openly from your heart? Don't you think that on that 10,000th attempt, it's going to be easier than the very first time that you did it? I would invite anybody who wants to argue that point to hit me up directly. Let's have a conversation. It's pretty obvious, right? It's a loaded one because the more that we practice something, the more we embody it, the more we become that thing that we practice. Being able to stand in front of people and be grounded and centered when I'm sharing my deep truth or when I'm communicating a belief to other people. If I'm sitting up here on this podcast like, you guys, you need embodied knowledge, and oh my God, this is really nerve-wracking and edgy for me to say this to you, you're not going to receive the messages clearly, right? We're always reading beyond just the words that are coming out. We're checking in with the body language. Can I trust what this person is saying? Are they anchored and rooted in what they're saying? Do I even believe it? You know when somebody's BSing you because they don't even believe what they're saying. You can read it and feel it in their body. That's what embodied knowledge is. And there's transfer from these different embodied practices we do. Stretching, movement, leaning into, making contact with each other. Some of these concepts are so foreign. When was the last time that you wrestled an adult man, right? When was the last time that you all out exerted your physical force against somebody else in a healthy and productive way? Or even if you did it in an unhealthy and non-productive way, when was the last time that that happened? We don't have those experiences. And if we don't put ourselves in those circumstances that allow us to gain and gather that experience, we're not going to have that knowledge to use when it counts. So going back to the difference between academic and embodied knowledge. Academic wisdom that I can listen to, that I can read in a book, that I can hear somebody else talk about, a story that somebody shares that gives me a good idea. It's valuable knowledge. Somebody who tells me about, let's say, for example, I'm going on a trip to Death Valley, and I've never been there before, and someone who's been there says, oh, you know what? When you're out there in Death Valley, make sure that as you're walking through the canyons, you look where you're stepping really closely, because there's snakes there that will coil up underneath these rocks. And when you are walking through these canyons, make sure you watch the ground, because if you step on one, they could bite you and be a bad situation. Now that's academic knowledge, right? That's something that I just register in my brain, but I have to go out and actually be on the land, practicing watching my footsteps in order for that wisdom to mean something. It gets me started, but it's not complete until I've actually practiced it. You and I are the result, the sum total of all the things that we practice. So ask yourself, what are you practicing? What have you been practicing in your life? Are you practicing waking up early, being disciplined about your diet and going to the gym? Are you practicing being more open and honest in your communication? Are you practicing standing in front of a camera and speaking to a bunch of people you don't know? Is what you're practicing matching up with what you're committed to? Do your practices match the vision that you're stepping into? If I have a vision of standing on a stage and speaking in front of 100,000 people, then I better start giving myself some experience of standing in front of people and speaking to them. Maybe it starts with 1. Maybe it starts with 10, 20, 200. But I have to give myself those reps, those life reps, that experience that you just can't substitute with any type of book wisdom or intellectual smarts. It's got to be in the body. So remember, you are what you practice. And if what you're practicing doesn't match up with the vision that you have for yourself and what you want to create, then something needs to change, specifically about the way that you're practicing. And if you're looking for a place to go deeper into your practices, then join us here for Dojo, May 4th through the 7th. It's going to be an amazing container for 4 days. We're going to dive deeply into these embodiment principles and practices, getting your body more experience, more real repetitions, so that you're prepared for that unknown that's coming right down the road. So go ahead and get yourself registered for Dojo. It's going to be incredible. I'm really looking forward to being back on the mat and in the dojo with you men. And for anybody else out there, if you hear this message and you know there's somebody who really needs to hear it today, send it over to them. You don't even have to say anything. Just say, hey, thought about you. Check this out. And we'll see you next week for another Monday morning meditation.